He taught us something very important. Aside some of the other things that he talked about, he did mention the problem of evil. And the truth of the matter is that the problem of evil is also a practical problem that we have in the world today. If you're a Christian or a non-Christian, you face it, you experience it. Okay, he did mention if we have God, you know, presiding in this world, if we have God, a loving God that actually created humans, why do we have pain in this world? Why do we have eruption, volcanic eruptions, in different parts of the world, and then people die as a result of that? Why do we have crashes, air crashes, and then you have hundreds of people dying? What was God looking at? What was he doing when these things happen? Why do we have Christians who are prayerful, dedicated to God? They are very zealous and passionate, okay, in their service to God. Why do we have evil befalling them? Probably they lost their husband, for those that are women, and the ones that are men, they lost their wife. In fact, some have even lost their wife at the point of labor. What was God doing at that point in time? I mean, some of us have even asked God in some of the very difficult aspects of our lives, God, where are you? Some of us will ask the question, God, why me? Now, these are very practical issues in our lives, okay? As believers, it's practical. In fact, for the unbelievers also, it is practical. And you discover that this is one of the objections that the atheists and the non-Christians have against the Christian faith. They will ask us, if our God is all loving, all powerful, why is he not doing something about this? And then some of us have been asking ourselves too, but that's a very reasonable question. I mean, if God is all loving, he's all powerful, why is he not doing something about this? And I'm so glad that our dear doctor and friend right here, Dr. Steve, will be talking on that. So a little bit of background of who Dr. Steve is before I bring him up to the podium. In 1998, Dr. Steve traveled to Kenya to teach for 2 weeks at the Nairobi International School of Theology. Now, as a well-educated pastor, he felt called to teach and also comfortable in the classroom, but he was totally unprepared for the great pastoral needs he encountered outside the classroom and also by the highways and also the byways of Africa. A new calling began forming in Pastor Steve's heart, and in 2003, he founded ITEM, ITEM, that is International Training and Equipping Ministry, leaving the pastoral ministry to devote his energy to training of African pastors. Before ITEM, Pastor Steve actually served as a missionary with CRU, that's CRU, and you can find the activities of CRU at www.cru.org. And then he's been a pastor for over 25 years. Please, I want you to join me as we bring to the podium Dr. Steve Van On. Can we please appreciate him?
It's good to be with you today. A little bit more of my story. The most important part of me is that I am married to one woman for 54 years. 54 years, yes. We believe that God has said in his word that marriage is between one man and one woman who become one flesh for a lifetime and raise a family. And so we've been married for 54 years. We have 2 children. They're both girls. And our firstborn has 4 children, and they're all girls. And our secondborn has 2 children, and they're both girls. And our first granddaughter has 1 child. That grandchild's a girl. Her daughter is a girl. Our number 3 granddaughter has 1 child, and her child is a girl. Are you getting a pattern? And our number 2 granddaughter has 2 children. They're boys. So, 1 wife, 2 daughters, 6 granddaughters, 2 great-granddaughters, and 2 great-grandsons. As was mentioned, I started a ministry, International Training and Equipping Ministries, in 2003. I've been coming to Africa since 1998, and this is either my 74th or 75th trip to Africa. So I've spent a lot of time here over the years. I've been to your country many, many times. I've had the privilege of doing training in Jos and Abuja, Lagos, Bissau, Kaduna, Yola, Akuri, Biu. So I've been all over your country in these 20 years or so. So I understand a little bit of your challenges here, and I'm so glad to be here to be able to speak with you today. Something that I want to talk about today is, as mentioned, is the problem of evil, and why would God allow evil to go on if he's a loving God and an all-powerful God, and I want to talk about that a little bit. And there are actually two levels of that question. The first level of that question would be asked of a person who is an atheist who does not believe in God. And their question would come something like this. If God is love, if your God is loving and your God is all powerful, why doesn't he stop the evil? So that would be a question that an atheist may ask us. And so it's what we need to be able to do is to compare and think about worldviews. And what I want us to see is the worldview of a Christian and the worldview of an atheist. And then I want to go specifically and talk about the question why there is evil. So I want to talk first about worldviews, because our worldview will determine how we see and respond to what is happening in the culture around us. The way we see the world will determine how we see and respond to what we see happening in the culture around us. And the question that we want to ask is our response God's intended response? So what is a worldview? By definition, you'll find different definitions in different places. But one of the definitions that I like to use is this. It's a pattern of ideas and beliefs, convictions and habits that help us make sense of God, the world, and our relationship to God and the world. It's ideas, beliefs, convictions, habits that make sense of God and the world and our relationship to God and the world. Another way to talk about worldview, it's like a set of glasses. When I take my glasses off and I try to read the Bible, it's hard to understand, it's hard to read, it's hard to see the words. But when I put my glasses on, everything becomes clear. Well, here's how it works in a worldview. If I take my glasses off, maybe it's hard to understand and to say, what's going on in the world? Why is that happening? Why is that happening? Why is that happening? But when I put my worldview glasses on, it all makes sense now. It becomes very clear, and I begin to understand why that is happening, why that is happening, and why that is happening. So it's like a set of glasses that you look through to bring what is happening in the world into mental focus. Every worldview, and this is what I want us to focus on when we are comparing a Christian worldview and an atheistic worldview. And those are the two that we're comparing right now. There are questions that every worldview has to answer. The first question is, where did everything come from? That's the first question. The second question is identity. What is a human being? Who am I? What does it mean to be human? That's the second question. The third question is this. It has to do with meaning in life. What is the meaning of life? What is my purpose? Why am I here? The next one is morality. Is there right and wrong? And if there is, who determines what's right and wrong? And then we look at the world and say, what's wrong with the world and can it be fixed? So that's the question of morality. And then the last one is destiny. What happens when we die and where is history headed? And those are questions that every individual, every person out there in this area, everyone in Nigeria, everyone in Africa, everyone in the world has to deal with these questions. And so every person has a worldview, whether they call it a worldview or not, because they have opinions about where the universe came from. They have opinions about what it means to be a human being. They have an opinion about what is right and what is wrong. They have an opinion about where you find meaning in life, and they have an opinion about what happens when we die. That's their worldview. So let's first quickly look at the biblical Christian worldview. There are presuppositions. There are basic things that we believe in right from the beginning. First of all, that God exists and God is the primary reality. Everything begins with God. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created. Now here's an apologetic question for you. Somebody asked me this question one time. If God created everything, where was God before he created everything? If God created everything, where was God before he created everything? That's a good question. But the answer to that is that God is outside of space and time. That's hard to understand. But God is outside of space and time. He does not exist in space. He does not exist in time as we know it. He created time. He created space. He created matter. He took matter and created the universe, and he created us. Before that, he was outside of all of that. That's hard for the human mind to understand, but that's the answer. And in Hebrews, it says God has spoken. Formerly, he spoke through the prophets, meaning through the writings. Now he has spoken to us through his Son. So God exists, and God has spoken. And then something we're going to look at the end of my presentation is the biblical story, what we call a meta-narrative, the overarching story that ties together Genesis all the way to Revelation. And that will include creation, fall, redemption, and new creation or restoration. But I'm going to look at that in a moment. We don't need to look. The biblical Christian, that worldview is that the origin is a personal God created everything. And the word personal is underlined there because the biblical Christian worldview is that our God is very personal. He's with us. He's beside us. Through his Spirit, he's in the believer. God is a very personal God. Now, from what I understand through the traditional religions, God is not that personal. In Islam, God is not that personal. But the biblical Christian worldview is that he is very personal. He's like a friend. Identity, we were created in the image and likeness of God. The image and likeness of God. Every person who has ever been born was created in the image of God. No matter how wicked, no matter how sinful, no matter how terrible we might think that person is, they were created in the image of God. Next is meaning. What is the meaning for us? Jesus told the woman at the well in John 4:24 that God is seeking true worshipers, those who worship him in spirit and in truth. So worship is why we are here. Paul wrote to the Corinthians that all that you do to the glory of God. We are here to glorify God. What does that mean? One way to think about glorifying God is to think of yourself as a mirror. What happens when you look at a mirror? You see a reflection of who? Yourself. So what we want to do is be that mirror that reflects God to the people who look at us. That's what it means to glorify God. When they see us, they see the nature of God, the personality of God, the love of God, the grace of God, the mercy of God, because that is what characterizes our life. So that's what it means to glorify God. We're to build his kingdom, Matthew 28. Go into all the world and make disciples, baptizing them and teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you, Jesus said. So that's origin, identity, meaning, morality. Is there right and wrong? We believe there is. We believe there are things that are always right. There are things that are always wrong. Where does that come from? The character of God. God is the source of morality. God is the source of what is right and wrong. So we would say, yes, morality is very definite and it is based on the character of God. Then destiny, we believe that there is a new heaven and a new earth coming, and everyone will spend eternity in one of two places. Now let me just quickly address the question, why would God send anyone to hell to burn for eternity? Here's a simple answer to that. God sends nobody to hell. God sends nobody to hell. That's where they choose to be. And here's why I say that. God has created heaven, and he has invited everyone to join him in heaven. All they need to do is acknowledge that they are separated from him because of their sin, acknowledge that, repent of that, and say, Father, forgive me. I have sinned. I now give my life to Jesus. That's all they need to do to go to heaven. But those who refuse to do that are choosing the alternative. And that's hell. Here's another way of looking at that. Let's say there's just two houses in the world. There's my house and there's somebody else's house. And I'm a loving person, and that person is not a loving person. They're a tyrant. And I say, I want you to come to my house, and here's all you need to do to be accepted into my house. Clean yourself up. That's what God's saying spiritually, is clean yourself up. And you say, no, thank you. I don't want to go to your house. There's only one other house you can go to. So it's your choice. So God doesn't send anybody to hell. People choose to go there because they don't want to go where God is. It's a choice that they make. So destiny. Everyone will spend eternity in one of two places. Now let's look at the atheistic or naturalistic worldview. And here's the point that I want to make. If there is no God, there is no meaning in life. And every individual has to find some meaning for themselves. If there is no God, there is no right and wrong. There's no good and evil. Why not? Because good and evil becomes your opinion and my opinion and your opinion and your opinion and someone else's opinion. And whose opinion is correct? There needs to be someone who establishes a law that says this is right and this is wrong, that we all are then in subjection to. That's the point that I want to make. So this man, a German, Friedrich Nietzsche, way back in 1883 made this statement: God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. What he was saying is, we do not need God to explain anything. Man can explain everything on his own. The big idea of naturalism is that only matter and energy exist. There's no spiritual element. Only matter and energy exist. They are the only realities. There's no supernatural being. There's no supernatural event. And they would say that every single person, we call that autonomy. Autonomy, I'm my own authority. no one can tell me what to do. That's autonomy. It's me and me alone. That my reason, your reason, our individual reason is enough, along with science, to lead to knowledge. And they say that reason, the ability to reason, to do logic, to understand, to gain knowledge, to find truth, is developed through natural evolution. There's no God, no supernatural. It's just over a period of all these thousands, and they would say millions of years, that has been developed. Now they say that the universe is in its original state. Now let me stop there for a minute because I'm going to come back to that later. So let me stop here. When God created the universe, at the end of Genesis 1 and 2, what did he say? It is what? Not just good. After he created Eve, he said it's very good. That was the original state. But then what happened in Genesis 3? Sin. What was cursed? Creation. So for the biblical Christian worldview, the universe is not in its original state. It has been corrupted by sin. Is that right? The one who does not believe in God would say, no, the universe is like it has always been. And here is their theory. There was an explosion, a big bang, about 14 billion years ago. That's a long time. The universe began, scientists believe, with every speck of its energy jammed into a very tiny point. And this extremely dense point exploded with unimaginable force, creating matter, propelling it outward to make billions of galaxies of our vast universe. That's the theory of one who does not believe in God. But here's the question for them. If it's true that that tiny speck exploded and created all of these galaxies in our universe, where did the small speck come from? Did it have a creator? That's the question they have to answer. So here's what they say to the 5 questions. The origin. This man says the universe is eternal. The universe, the cosmos, is all that there is, or ever was, or ever will be. The universe is eternal. That speck is eternal. It's been here forever. That's what they believe. But what they're beginning to understand in science is that the universe had a beginning. I'll look at this in just a moment. They're beginning to say the universe had a beginning. Even non-Christian scientists are beginning to acknowledge the universe had a beginning. And the reason they say that is because the universe is slowly expanding. And when you put it in reverse, it would be slowly contracting until there was no universe. So because it is expanding slowly, even non-Christian atheistic scientists are saying it must have had a beginning. So how did it start? Well, here's one theory. It created itself. Can you imagine the universe creating itself out of nothing? Well, that's what this theory is saying. I won't go into the details here, but it's just saying here's reasons to believe that the universe exists and that it caused itself to exist. We can't point to anything out there in nature, in the world, that created itself. There was always a cause. So they believe the universe is closed, determined by cause and effect. That's going to be very important. No miracles. In other words, everything that happens in creation or in the universe has been caused by something forcing it to do that. It might be like putting two balls on a table, and you push one ball, it hits the other ball, and it causes that ball to move. The cause, the effect. And they see everything in the universe as being a result of some cause and some effect. So you just have these so-called, and I'll use the idea of a ball, this universe filled with balls bumping into each other, causing different movements. Cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, with no purpose, no meaning, just cause and effect. Identity, they say human beings are complex machines made up of only matter. Complex machines made up of matter only. There's nothing spiritual about us. We're only matter, something physical. And that personality is an interrelation between the chemical and the physical dynamics that define who we are. This man, Richard Dawkins, is is probably the most quoted atheist in the world. And he says DNA neither cares nor knows. You know what DNA is? That's what defines what we are. Everything about us is recorded in the DNA that we have within our body. Did you know that every cell in your body, every cell, contains enough information to cover about 500,000 movies? That's how much information there is in one human cell. And the atheist says, oh, that just happened accidentally without a God. Well, Richard Dawkins says, DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. In other words, we are just responding to our DNA. We have no choice. We're just responding to our DNA. Now, let me ask you a question. If I were to do something evil that we would define as evil, Richard Dawkins would say, that's not evil. You're just dancing to your DNA. And so if there is no God, we cannot say that what the Boko Haram or the Fulani tribesmen are doing is wrong. They're just dancing to their DNA. That's what the atheist says, just dancing to your DNA. Matter and energy, are they only the realities? Well, what about our thoughts and dreams? We have thoughts. Right now, you have thoughts going through your mind. That's not physical. And our dreams that we have, those aren't physical. So how does the non-Christian atheist explain thoughts and dreams? Well, this is what this man said. The brain, which is made up of matter, secretes. In other words, it secretes, it gives out thoughts, which are non-matter, in the same way that our liver secretes bile. So looking for a way to explain thoughts and dreams. What about meaning? Richard Dawkins again says, in the end, life is meaningless. This is what the atheist says. That natural selection is like a blind watchmaker, blind because it does not see ahead, does not plan consequences, and has no purpose in view. So that's how the naturalist, the atheist, sees life. It's meaningless, and there's no purpose in view. You have to define and discover your own purpose on your own. Morality, they would say that values are constructed by human beings from human experience. Values, what is right and what is wrong, are constructed. Some say that they are culturally constructed, that your culture has come together over time and defined what's right and what's wrong, and that my culture has done the same thing, and we have a list of what is right and what is wrong, and that every culture has a different list of what is right and what is wrong. But then when you have two cultures sitting in the same room together, who's going to decide which list is the right list? Because I like what somebody how somebody looks at it. One culture may say, love your neighbor. Another culture may say, eat your neighbor. So who's decide who's right? And we would say God's the one that defines that. Here's another atheist. He says human destiny, now looking at destiny as an episode between two oblivions. In other words, there's nothing on this end of your life. There's nothing on this end of your life. You came out of nowhere. After your life, you go back to nowhere. You are not existent here. You're not again going to be existent there. You just come, you live a few years, and you're gone. What difference does it make? So that is how the atheist answers those questions of origin, identity, morality, meaning, and destiny. Quite different than the way that we would answer those questions. But as we think about it, here's a summary. This man who died 9 years ago summarizes everything. He says there is no God, there's no life after death, there's no ultimate foundation for ethics, there's no ultimate meaning in life, there's no human free will, all are deeply connected to the evolutionary perspective. No God, no life after death, no ground for ethics, no ultimate meaning, no free will. That is the atheistic worldview. Would you say that's kind of hopeless? That's a hopeless existence. That's a hopeless existence. So they would say that in the evolutionary process, in other words, there's no God. 14 billion years ago, the universe was created, and it was like this big machine with gears and levers, and all of these work together, springs, they all work together, and that the universe is like one big machine just acting on each part acting on each other. They say that 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, out of creation, out of the mud, out of whatever was there, life started. And over these 3.5 to 4 billion years, we see the process where the simple animal kingdom became the kingdom of human beings that we are today. And that it all happened through a natural selection, that there was no God involved at all. And what they see is that human beings are just a part of this big machine. And we're just interacting with the universe, with nature, and we're just a part of nature, and we're responding, cause and effect, effect. Like that man said, no free will. We have no choice in it. We are just responding to what's going on around us. That's the naturalistic, atheistic worldview. No creator, matter only, no spirit, no soul, no meaning, no purpose, no morals, no hope for the future. That's the atheistic worldview. But what I want to talk about now, and this is where we're making the transition, is one of the questions that is asked of us and has already been asked this morning is, where does evil come from? Well, we've already said if there is no God, there is no evil. If there is no God, there is no evil. Because all of us are just dancing to our DNA. If there's evil, there's got to be right. If there's right and wrong, who defines what's right or wrong? There's got to be a supreme being that is defining for all of creation what is right and wrong. Let me just take an example. If we can demonstrate that just one thing is always wrong, always right, now we have established the truth that there is something that morality, absolute morality exists, at least in one area, but we could find several. Let me just give you a very quick story, and then we'll get back to this. A friend of mine who's an atheist was talking about the very strict laws against homosexuality in Uganda. And he was talking about how oppressive this is and how wicked it is and how evil it was to have all these laws against homosexuality. And so I began to have a dialogue with him, texting back and forth. And I said, do you believe that anything is always right or always wrong? He said, yes. I said, what? He said, child abuse, injustice. And he went on from there, which we would agree with. But then I asked him, I said, what is your source of believing that? Because those in Uganda have a different view than you. So who's to say that you're right and they're wrong? I said, I agree with you. There are things that are right and wrong, but that's not an opinion of mine. I appeal to a higher authority who defines right and wrong. That was the end of our discussion. So let's look at this story. And this story now to me explains the question of evil. And this is a very simple story that you can share with your friends. In the beginning, God created, day 1, the heaven and the earth. Day 2, the sky and the seas. Day 3, the land and the plants. Day 4, the sun, the moon, the stars, and the planets. Day 5, the fish and the birds. Day 6, other animals, the land animals, male and female. So those are the 6 days of creation. And notice that I put in large letters, bold letters, male and female. Men and women, male and female, Adam and Eve are the ultimate in God's creation. You and I are at the highest level of God's creation, created in the image and likeness of God. No other animal was created in the image and likeness of God, only human beings. And so in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, we see God's greatest creature, human being, man and woman, in this case, Adam and Eve. Psalm 139 tells us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made in God's image. Men and women, that is significant because every single person on the face of the earth that is living now, has ever lived, or will ever live, is fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God. And that should influence the way that we treat others. We have an eternal soul, and that soul is going to spend eternity somewhere. And that God has given us the ability to reflect on what is meaningful, what our purpose is, what is right and what is wrong. Here's how we see. Let me tell you what science is supposed to be. In the beginning, God created the universe. Psalm 19. The heavens are declaring what? The heavens are declaring the glory of God. And so God has given humans the ability of doing reasoning, doing science, thinking critically, looking at the universe, studying the universe, and concluding what? God is glorious. That's the purpose of science, to study God's creation and give glory to Him. That's why God gave us the ability to do science. The ability to reflect upon the meaning of life, the purpose of life, what is right and what is wrong. Then at the end of Genesis chapter 1, he says everything was very good. But now, in our story, there are 4 big chapters. We just looked at chapter 1 in Genesis, creation, and everything is very good. Now we go all the way through to Revelation chapter 21, where Jesus is saying, I'm making all things new. there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. You got to ask the question, what happened? Why do we need a new heaven and a new earth? I thought everything was very good. See, when we're talking to people about evil, what is happening is that individual is looking at what's happening in their own life, or looking at their neighbor, their relative, their friend, somebody very close to them, maybe looking at the country, seeing what's going on with the murdering of Christians. In Cameroon, it's the war that's going on. In Rwanda, it's a genocide that took place in 1994. So we have a tendency to look at our own little part of the world and focus on that and say, why? Why me? Why my mother? Why my relative? Why my country? So why does it all have to be created over again? We go back to chapter 2 in God's story, not chapter 2 in the Bible, but chapter 2 in God's story, and that's the fall. That into God's perfect creation that was very good came sin. Adam and Eve had only one restriction: don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There was only one tempter, and that was the devil. There was only one bad choice, and that was eating of the fruit. And by the eating of the fruit, everything changed. Everything. Humans were cursed in Genesis chapter 3, verse 14. We were all, at that point, humans had a deceitful heart. Jeremiah writes that the hearts of men are wicked and deceitful. We all are born now with a sin nature. We have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. The ground was cursed in Genesis chapter 3, verse 17. So as a result of Genesis chapter 3, disease entered the world. Disasters entered creation. Every disease entered in Genesis 3. Every potential disaster, flood, drought, volcanoes, earthquakes, any natural disaster you can think of, pestilence, came into God's creation in Genesis chapter 3. Famine, floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, murder, adultery, wars, genocides, robbery, corruption, all evil. All of this entered God's creation in Genesis chapter 3. And so every evil that we can point out today, you can say, look at that evil, look at that, look at that, look at that. It's been here since Genesis chapter 3. Well, how could God allow a war in Cameroon when all the churches are praying that God would end the war? There's been wars since Genesis chapter 3. And if he's obligated to end one war, wouldn't he be obligated to end all wars? And that would take us right back to Genesis chapter 2. Genocides. Well, look what's happening to us here in Nigeria. Why doesn't God stop it? Unfortunately, there's been genocides since Genesis chapter 3. And if he chooses to end one genocide, wouldn't he be obligated to end all genocides? Well, look at the corruption. Look at the robbery. Why did he put a stop to that? There's been corruption and robbery from Genesis chapter 3. If he puts a stop to it now, here, wouldn't that have obligated him to stop all robbery and all corruption all the way back to Genesis chapter 2? Do you see the point I'm making? So all of this has been with us since Genesis chapter 3. And I'll just give a personal story. My sister died a couple of years ago. And she suffered a lot. She suffered more than most people suffer before they die. I'll just leave it at that. Just take my word for it. And her son, my nephew, who does not believe in God, said, Uncle Steve, if God existed, why would he allow my mother to suffer like she suffered before she died? And that's a good question. But one thing is we have to understand that's being asked on an emotional level, not an intellectual level. So you have to identify with the emotion. And I said, his name is Wade. I said, Wade, I understand what you're feeling. And I'm sure it's very painful. Losing a mother, I lost a sister, and seeing how much she suffered. But then I explained this, and I explain this to you. You can explain this to any of your friends who are asking these types of questions. Because of Genesis chapter 3, every single one of us is going to suffer. All of us. We are going to suffer in some way before we die. It might be emotional, it might be physical, it might be mental. We're all going to feel the effects of sin, not necessarily our sin, because we've been forgiven. Although if we made bad choices as a person that is causing some kind of disease, then yes, our sin has led to that. But we could suffer from a natural disaster, from famine, from flood. And so we're all going to suffer. The Apostle Paul suffered. You look throughout the Bible, and the believers suffered. And I explained to him, I said, Wade, your mother suffered a lot, but you know what? All the way back in the beginning of the Bible, after God created everything, sin entered the world, and that changed everything and brought on suffering. So we need to help people understand the big picture, because all of us have a tendency to focus on our own little part of the world. And that's understandable, because we're the ones that are feeling that pain personally. But we need to help them see the big picture of where this fits into God's big story of creation, fall, and then the next one. Oh, this was it. Let's go through this quickly. The fall. The world is broken. How can it be fixed? New government leaders aren't going to fix it. Form of government is not going to fix the world. More laws, not going to fix the world. Better education, not going to fix the world. Now, good government leaders, maybe the form of government, maybe better laws, maybe education is going to help locally, but it's not going to fix the problems in the world. What's going to fix the problems? This is chapter 3 in God's big story. Creation, everything was very good. The fall, everything became very bad. Now, chapter 3, redemption. Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures. Then he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. That's the answer. And I was able to tell my nephew, Wade, your mother suffered a lot, but you know what? She had a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And now that this physical life is over, She is in no longer any pain, not suffering anymore, and she's with God in heaven for eternity. The answer is spiritual, not physical. It's not more laws, not better government, it's not better education, not a different form of government. It's redemption in the name of Jesus Christ. And Jesus, this all began with actually, you go back to Genesis chapter 12, which is the covenant that God made with Abraham and said, I will bless you and I will bless those who bless you, and through your seed all the nations will be blessed. And we go all the way through the Old Testament. We go right into the New Testament when Jesus came, was crucified, and rose from the dead. One other thing, and we'll finish up. Christianity is the only religion where God came into his own creation and solved the problem himself. You hear what I said? No other religion has God coming out of eternity, entering his creation. Not that there are other gods, but you know the traditions, and solving the problem. He took on the problem himself of sin and did something about it. He didn't have to. But God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. God demonstrates his love for us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So God came into his creation to give us an answer, and Jesus is now in the process of making all things new, one life at a time. So God's story is found in the Bible. 4 major chapters: creation, fall, redemption, new creation. And that's how we help people understand what's going on. I want to finish with just one verse, a couple of verses out of 2 Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, beginning he says a lot in this chapter. But when he's talking about the difficulties, beginning in verse 16 in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, he says, therefore, now think about those who are suffering. Think about the things you're suffering, whether some kind of hardship, poverty, it's difficult to get along, it's difficult to meet the needs of your family. He says, therefore, we do not lose heart. But though our outer man is decaying, this body, yet the inner man, the spirit, is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction. He would say that the affliction that we suffer for our 60, 70, 80 years, whatever that might be, the momentary light affliction that we suffer during our life on earth is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at what we see, we don't look at the things which are seen. We don't look at the things that are seen with our physical eyes, the pain, the suffering, the evil, the corruption, all of that. We don't look at that. But we look at the things which are not seen. For those things which are seen are temporal. They're going to come to an end. But the things which are not seen are eternal. So Paul writes in Colossians chapter 3, verse 1, keep your eyes on the things above, not on the things of earth. So I hope that helps. Let me pray. Father, I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak today on this question of pain, suffering, and evil. And I pray that this has been helpful to those here in the room and to those who are watching online, that they would see that suffering is inevitable. Evil has happened because of Genesis chapter 3. But you have the answer. You have provided the answer in Jesus Christ. And I pray that we would understand that we would share this story with our friends who are suffering and have questions. And for those who doubt your existence, may they see that you do exist, that even the existence of evil is evidence that you exist, because you're the one that defines what is good and what is evil. So, Lord, again, thank you for this. Thank you for sending your Son, coming in the person of your Son, to pay the price so that we could have eternal life. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.